Welcome back, folks, to McCord's Gardens here in the heart of the Rockies, Provo, Utah. Plant Boss here. Today we are going to talk about how to pot a bonsai. Now, bonsais are amazing. They're basically miniaturized trees. They're based on the Eastern religious philosophy of being able to double back a living thing on itself to increase the longevity of that particular item's spiritual essence. Now, in addition to that, we get input both from the Chinese culture and the Japanese culture on how to do bonsai. Modern bonsai predominantly stems from the Japanese culture, and there's some many wonderful things. So I would highly recommend, when you get a second, Google bonsai and look up the history of how this interesting art form came into being. The other really cool thing about this is that when you are creating a bonsai, you're creating something that is part of you to give to future generations. So you're leaving a legacy every time you create a bonsai and also help it to survive and thrive. So the first thing that we need to do that in order to get a bonsai to a point where we are regularly caring for that is to get the bonsai potted. Now, I have two examples of trees that could be used for bonsais here. I have a Chinese elm, which is a deciduous tree. That means that it drops its leaves in the fall. Or a Shimka juniper. And this juniper is a coniferous example, or it is an evergreen. And these actually make really, really beautiful bonsais because of the way they are shaped, the bark structure, and the foliage structure. Now, if we are really going to go in deep to this, I would also tell you that each bonsai has a feminine and masculine side. Most bonsais that are curvy and smooth bark or have flowers are considered feminine. Those that are more gnarly in shape and also have rough bark, as this juniper, and where the foliage is not as broad, are considered more masculine. You also need to keep in mind the kind of pot that you're going to use for your bonsai, and from that perspective, there is also a masculine and feminine. Pots that are more squared, such as this, that are missing filigree work and that are more bold in color and appearance are considered masculine. Those pots that have filigree work on them, that are rounded or oval in shape and that have feet on them, are considered feminine. So for my bonsai today, I've selected a masculine tree to go in a masculine pot, and be sure the first thing you need to look at with a bonsai pot is, does the pot have holes in it? This does, because bonsais really require proper drainage just as any plant, but even more so because they are actually trees, not just smaller plants. Now, you also need to get a bit of mesh, and you can obtain this at your local hardware store. Cut a piece small enough that it goes over that hole, because we want to make sure that the soil and the rocks that we're going to be putting into this are not falling out the bottom of the hole themselves. In addition, you should make sure that your pot has a humidity tray that can slide under it. A humidity tray is nothing more than a saucer that has got a layer of rock in it, and you're going to be able to put that rock in there and then fill the tray with water. That way, when you put your pot on top of the tray, it will be seated above the water. The idea is not for the water to water the bonsai, but to create a humid environment around the bonsai so that it can thrive. And especially here in Utah or the Intermountain West and the high desert regions, or even the Southwest and the West Coast, we want to make sure that we increase the humidity around the bonsai because it in general gets very hot here in our climate. Okay, next step, after you finish getting your humidity tray ready, we're going to want to put a layer of rock in the bottom of the bonsai. Now this rock, you can use any cleaned pebbles or something to your liking. In this case, the rock I am using actually came from Japan. It is volcanic rock, volcanic river rock. We're going to put a layer of that rock in the bottom of the pot over the mesh that you've used to cover the holes for drainage. And then you're going to put a very shallow layer of soil. Now, a word about soil, as I'm putting my prep soil in here. I got this soil ready just a little bit before we started shooting this video. You only need about a half an inch to an inch of soil, just enough to cover those pebbles in the bottom of the pot. But I highly recommend getting soil that is a general purpose mix, but specifically mixed for bonsai. These soil mixes have a special clay in it called akadama clay that comes from Japan, and bonsais love this akadama clay because it helps the soil to drain better and also keeps the roots healthy. Now, if I were to be creating my own soil mix, I would use the akadama clay and put it into a general mix to create the mix for bonsais. We have that going here, so we'll go ahead and continue. Once you have that layer of soil in your bonsai pot, you're going to take your bonsai, remove it from the pot, and you can use, these trees were specifically grown to be bonsaied, but you can use even a gallon juniper that you may obtain at your local garden center. In this case, I've got these that were specifically grown for this purpose, and you're going to rip that first inch of soil off the bottom of the tree. And the reason why we're doing that is because we want to disturb and interrupt that root growth pattern. Currently, the roots are growing in a circle. We want to break that root bound up and also loosen the soil up from below the bonsai and allow us to have a little bit more room for potting the bonsai into this smaller pot. Now, in Asia, a lot of times they will use chopsticks, and they actually come in handy. They're specifically designed for the bonsai. And what we can do is we can use those to get the earth away from the roots just a little bit better. As you can see, we've got a lot of nice root growth coming out of there now. Also take note, do you see the white roots here? That tells us that this bonsai is a healthy bonsai. If you had completely brown or black rooting, I'd be suspicious that the bonsai may be dying. And so we want to make sure that you have some nice healthy root growth in the bonsai that you're going to be potting. So this is a good one. Once you do that and get those roots down and ready to go, you're going to station the bonsai or position the bonsai in the bonsai pot. You can either do that as a central planting or maybe off to the side if you wanted to do something with more of a hill or a special feature like that. Remember, originally bonsais were done as total landscapes, and so it wasn't just a single tree but a complete landscape of the person that was creating the bonsais, perhaps the area in which he or she lived, to remind them of where they came from. Now, once you have the tree in the position that you would like, you're going to take a wire, and I like to use just regular copper electric wire that has been coated because that keeps that wire coating, or keeps the metal wire from touching the roots of the bonsai. I'm going to remove the bonsai for a moment, and then through the holes in the bottom of the pot, I'm going to thread the bonsai. And sometimes you may move the mesh. Just make sure you get the mesh back in place. Bring the wire about halfway up, and then you're going to push it into the roots of the tree. Now, the reason why we do this is because we are going to wire the tree into the pot. And there it is, coming out the other side. And if we wire the tree into the pot and the pot gets knocked, this ensures that the planting does not fall out of the pot and get broken. And that keeps our tree safe. So even though you may have a little bit of a soil disaster if the bonsai pot gets knocked, the tree itself remains intact and you don't break any of the branches or the trunk of the tree, which would be disaster for the legacy you're trying to create for future generations. Now, you're going to twist that wire in nice and tight in the bottom of the pot. Oops, let's try that one more time, folks. Put that there. Get that twisted in pretty tight. You can also use a pair of pliers for this if you need to, and then bend the twisted portion back up towards the pot so that it's stationed. Now, once you've got that wired in, you're going to continue to fill the soil around the roots of the tree. Once you have that soil in there nice and firm, remember, don't pack it in too tightly because we do want to allow room for water expansion, and also a little bit of an edge around the base of the soil. So when the water does, when you are watering that is, the water will stay on the soil and not overflow the pot. There we go. Try to make sure you get that soil around the roots really good. And don't be afraid to get your hands dirty with this, of course. Okay, so this bonsai now has been correctly potted. And notice how around the edge, I've left just a little bit of a space, almost like a gutter around the edge. And that will catch any water once we go to water this. Now, here's the fun part. We're going to create the landscape around the bonsai. And what I usually like to do is I like to get some form of moss. In this case, this is Irish moss. It's just a 4-inch pot that we have available here at the garden center. I would quarter this and just pull it out of the pot and quarter it with a good knife or shears that are designed for that purpose. And then you'll take those plugs and plug them in around the bonsai itself. Once you have your moss stationed in the pot, you can go crazy with how you want to decorate it. In this case, I've got a ceramic figurine here, a pagoda type ceramic. And you can put that however you would like, just to accent the tree itself. And then whatever rocks you may want to take and put in around the base of the tree to also add an accent, maybe create a faux river of rocks, or stepping stones if you have a figurine of a human. Those look very, very nice too. Once you have this completely set up and ready to go, and you have your moss planted too, you're going to set your bonsai on your humidity tray. And actually, I'm jumping a little bit ahead of the game. First, you're going to take this to the sink, and using distilled water, you're going to give this a very good soaking so that the tree has got a wet medium to root into, and it will encourage the root growth. Then, once you have that watered and it's draining, you're going to add water to your humidity tray, place the bonsai pot on top of the humidity tray, and put it where you'd like to have that bonsai displayed. Bonsais in a lot of ways are like children. They require a lot of attention. So every day you're going to do a water test using your finger. And if the soil is moist and just right, the hole will hold its shape that you poke with your finger. If not, and it fills with water, you know you're overwatering. If it's dry and doesn't hold its shape and the soil caves in kind of like that, that means you need to add more water. In addition, you're going to want to fertilize your bonsai probably about 4 times a year, depending on what season it is. And that is something that we will go into greater detail with in our next video, which will be how to care for a bonsai that has been correctly planted. So for now, this is the Plant Boss signing off and wishing you the best of luck for the bonsai you're creating as a legacy for your family.